Good afternoon. Today is Monday, January 23rd, and we are here for a board workshop on the budget. So at this time, I'll hand it over to Superintendent Eagle.
Thank you. We've got some updates. I want to thank the Budget Committee and the Cabinet and our union leadership for helping put together some of the things that you're going to see today. And Liz, if you can bring the slide deck up. We have some enrollment information as well, which is highly related to our budgeting process. And I'm going to start by looking at the enrollment situation with our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Fitzgerald. He's here with us this afternoon, and I'm going to let him take it from here for a little bit.
Thank you, Superintendent Eagle. I just wanted to give the board a brief overview on our current enrollment numbers and kind of a high-end overview. Again, just to preface, we're in January and it's very early, but wanted to give you an update as to where we're at. Enrollment is the primary driver of district revenue. The state funding is largely predicated on enrollment, especially through monthly apportionment we receive through OSPI. Budgeted FTE drives state apportionment funding from September through December. Beginning in January, year-to-date average, or the annual average FTE, also known as AAFTE, drives state apportionment funding in January. The average consists of all actual enrollment from September through January. Next month, it will include February and each month until year end. The numbers on the screen represent our K-12 enrollment, which was budgeted, our current AAFTE in January, and where we ended last year. Thank you. These enrollment numbers include ALE enrollment, but not Running Start or Open Doors. Although those enrollment counts are included in our monthly report and reported to OSPI, those are essentially pass-through funds as the district is paying those programs. So we're again focusing on the enrollment that is really driving the revenue in our district. As you can see, our numbers in January, which are at 6,917, are higher than what we have budgeted, but are less than what we had finished last year. Next slide, please. On the next slide here, you can see our actual enrollment trends beginning in 2015-16 through our January headcount of this year. Since 2016-17, district enrollment has been on a decline since the Alcoa plant closure. From 2016-17 and the 2018-19 school years, district enrollment declined by 345 FTE. The district began to see an increase in enrollment in 2019-20 school year, but due to the COVID pandemic lockdowns, the district saw a significant decline in enrollment in 2020-21 school year of over 380 FTE. And the district has not experienced a pre-pandemic rebound in enrollment since the lockdowns were lifted. On this slide here, you can see the previous table data presented in number format. Again, you can see the decline in 2016-17 with 200 FTE and 2020-21 school year with over 380 FTE. Finally, you can see the district decline this year is trending at a 1% compared to our prior year. So at the bottom there, we have 2022-23 based on our January headcount shows us down 58 or 68 FTE from prior year. Next slide, please. So what are some of the factors contributing to enrollment decline? As I previously stated, the Alcoa closure in 2016-17. We also had the COVID pandemic lockdown of 2020-21. And then we had Pinnacles Prep opening in 2021-22. Each year, they've been adding an additional grade level, and we have a working assumption that probably about 40 FTE that would normally be enrolled with our district may choose Pinnacles Prep. We also have declining birth rates in both the city and Chelan County. Right now, we are still waiting for up-to-date data on county and city birth rates. State data only shows county birth rates up until 2020, and we've had to use projections for city rates. I've reached out to the county and the state about whether there's up-to-date data available and waiting to hear back, as this would greatly help in our projections for the years to come. Until we get working data, the working assumption is that birth rates are continuing to decline and are generally a good indicator of incoming kindergarten class sizes. Next slide, please.
Before you go, Sean, can I add something to this piece? We ask parents when they unenroll, what is a reason that they might be leaving the district. And what I'm going to share with you is not necessarily hard data, but it's a hunch that I have based on some of that data. So I did look through for several years where parents had provided a reason for moving out of the district. And I noted a trend of really people who were listing that they were moving out of the area. Many of the reasons were things like moved to Quincy, moved to Spokane, moved to some other place outside the region. And I don't know if housing costs are a factor in some of that. I know that it was a prominent reason that I saw in some of the data. There's always a little bit of transfer between us and East Wenatchee across the river, and that was apparent in the data as well. And parents don't always have to give us a reason when we ask, but we do ask as part of the transfer of records process so that we know kind of where to send the records. And so that could be cost of living in this area could potentially be a factor as well.
All right, thank you, Bill. Next slide, please. Again, we're working with preliminary enrollment projections. This is January, so we are very early in our budget process. The projections are preliminary and subject to change based on additional data. Preliminary enrollment projections put our year-end K-12 enrollment at 6,915. This excludes Running Start and Open Doors. Year-end enrollment generally falls within 0.5% or 1% of our October FTE headcount, which is generally the highest enrollment month for school districts statewide. Again, until we get more data, the working assumption at this time is that enrollment will continue to decline at a gradual pace, and that is kind of the working assumption we're working with very early on in this budget process. Are there any questions?
I know you covered a little bit of Pinnacle Prep, but they're continuing to grow every year. Next year, they will be introducing 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Are we looking into that?
Yes, we're looking at the additional grade levels that are being added and the effect so far it has on our enrollment since its opening last year. Thank you.
Not really a question, but a comment. You mentioned housing, affordable housing being an issue, and Bill and I did go to the city to investigate the building permits that had been issued in the last, couple of years and what projects were being completed. And what we found was not very telling, but a majority of the units that have been built or are planned to be built were 1 and 2 bedroom multifamily units. And so it'll be interesting to see, if that frees up any single house, family housing. But it really doesn't look like there's a planned housing plan for families moving into the area. Most of that seems to be focused on single folks, couples. So.
Thank you.
Okay, Liz, I think I'm up if you want to move to the next slide. So at the risk of being redundant for folks who may be zooming and joining us for the first time in this budget process, I'm going to go over this timeline again, which as we've looked at this, we're down the road on a few of these things, but it's a very aggressive timeline in terms of budgeting. January is the first time during the school year that we are moving from budgeted enrollment numbers to our actual annual average FTE for our monthly apportionment. So we're very early, but we created this process and timeline to try and push some of our decisions as early as possible around the budget. So we are at a point where we've done the first three steps here. We've got some guiding principles and goals. I'll share those again just as kind of a review here in a moment. We've gathered some additional feedback from staff and we're processing that now. I'll share some themes from that feedback in a moment. And our goal is to, by mid-February, have some potential budget scenarios for the board based on our goals and principles and also some of the feedback we received from staff, with an ultimate goal that the budget could, the board could choose a scenario in late February that will then begin our work behind the scenes to make that happen. So the next slide is a review of our guiding principles. And there we go. One of the things in the forefront of our minds at the cabinet and district office here is our strategic plan. We want to show the priority for our strategic plan in the way we build our budget, and in any budget, the way you spend your money shows your priorities. So these things are in the background of decisions that we are looking at and the way we're looking at allocation of resources. In particular, we know we have future ready outcomes in the big 6 items for students, but also our core values and priorities, which include accountability. And that accountability piece includes stewardship and transparency in the way we use funds. So we're trying to be out front in this budgeting process and be very transparent, providing information to the staff and the community as we move through, which is really the second bullet there. We want to be as transparent as possible, inform our staff and community about how school district budgets work. They're not always the easiest budget processes to understand. And we are going to follow the language of our collective bargaining agreements throughout the process. And we've had our union staff involved considerably in development of these guiding principles and also the goals that you'll see on the next slide. So as we look to make reductions to get our budget back in a sustainable situation that aligns with our decline in enrollment, we are going to look to use natural attrition whenever possible. That is, when vacancies come up, we're going to look to see, can we fill the position from within using current staff, or do we make a decision to not fill the position and cover it in other ways? These goals were created in collaboration with the cabinet team, union leadership, and also the budget board, the board budget committee. And we do feel like natural attrition is something that will help us in the work that we have to do. And we're looking at those things very carefully. We have drafted an aggressive timeline, and part of that is out of fairness to our staff. We want to let people know as early as possible where we stand in the budget process and how that might impact the system when we start to put together scenarios. And as we move forward, we continue to try and maintain trust and collaboration with our union leadership in creating scenarios and gathering feedback for potential reductions. We would like to attempt to spread this in a phased approach. So we want to manage this over a number of years rather than a single year impact. And in the back of our minds, spreading that is not over just multiple years, but also how do we spread it throughout the system across grade levels and departments so that the impact is not borne solely by certain buildings or departments. And we also have in the back of our minds some consideration of the impact from 2018-19 budget reductions. And in the 2018-19 budget reductions, there were particular departments who were hit heavier than others. Some of the non-instructional departments, M&O as an example, during the reductions in 2018-19, 9 custodial staff were removed from the M&O department, which have not been replaced. And so That has added capacity issues to the work that we can do with our custodial staff, and that is in the back of our mind as we move forward as well. Some of these departments that were highly impacted in reductions in prior years that have not seen those reduced positions come back. And the next slide shows a little bit of this idea of natural attrition. We tried to trend some of the retirements and resignations over the past 5 years. And you see in the data that 21, 22, and 2021 were higher than normal in terms of retirements and resignations. And so in terms of trending this out, I'm really looking back to pre-pandemic data to try and make estimates of where we might be in terms of retirements and resignations for both certified and classified staff to help us understand where we might be. We did provide some incentives contractually to staff if they were willing to let us know early about retirement. Those incentives continue into this month, but we provided additional incentives in December for staff to let us know if they were thinking about making the decision for a retirement in particular, because the earlier we know those kinds of things, the better we'll be able to make predictions about where we're going to land in terms of budget work. So we're watching the trends. We're providing incentives for early notification, and I think that will help in the long run. The next slide talks a little bit about some feedback that we elicited from staff, and it was a survey provided in early January. It just closed last week, and this survey focused staff on our general fund category, which is where predominantly most of our money is in terms of a budget fund, and asked them to describe potential reductions. If they knew the amount in cost savings, we asked them to put a number down. If we are going to try and chase those numbers down for things that people weren't sure what the savings would be. And we asked them to describe potential impacts of their proposal, whether positive or negative, throughout the system. And you see some of the themes that are emerging in the feedback, and I'll talk briefly about those themes. One thing that we noticed right away was most of the suggestions seem to involve suggestions for reduction in staffing. And I guess I would say that the fact that most reduction suggestions were about staffing means we've communicated well that salaries and benefits comprise the bulk of our general fund expenses. And although we're working continually to reduce our materials, supplies, and operating costs, we know that salary, staff, and benefits comprise the majority of our general fund. And so that is going to be a factor. And people recognize that in their suggestions. That being the case, the majority of the feedback around potential staffing reductions centered on non-core classroom instructional staff, which I believe in the system shows value for the core classroom teaching positions as fundamental to the work that we do with students. There is also a perception that came out in the survey that the district is top heavy in administration. We saw that come out in several suggestions. And then there were a series of suggestions that lead us to believe we need to update our frequently asked questions sheet. And I give two examples here. One is around Chromebooks and iPads, and the other is around a 4-day school week. For example, it was suggested, why don't we you use purchase of Chromebooks as our technology platform instead of the iPads as a way to save additional dollars. And we're going to come back to the frequently asked questions document and address some of these. This will be one that we address because we buy bulk products from tech. The cost difference between an iPad and a Chromebook for us is about $17. per unit. It's iPad with a keyboard case for us is $354. The Chromebook is $337. So the difference is about $17 because we buy them in bulk. And our tech staff feels the iPads more closely match our needs for that small difference in price. And we'll talk about that in the frequently asked questions. It was also suggested that the district look at a 4-day school week, which we do have neighboring districts engaging in that. Waterville, I believe, does a 4-day school week, and there is some potential for cost savings there. But that is a larger community conversation that would need to happen. And the timing of the reductions we're going to need to make don't make that tenable. So an interesting suggestion, probably won't be on the docket for next year, but who knows where that might go in the future. So we'll update our frequently asked question document by addressing these kinds of questions and get that out in front of staff and the community as well. The next slide talks about where we think we are in terms of a preliminary reduction amount. And it's a pretty big range when you look at that. Excuse me. We're thinking somewhere between $8 and $9 million. And again, part of the reason that the range is so large at this point is we're so early in the process, but there are some factors that will run through here that are really unknowns for us that could have big impacts on where we land in that range. And Sean, as I go through these, please feel free to grab your mic and jump in. But the federal ESSER dollars exiting the system is a huge factor. We know that that could range from $6.1 to $7.1 million as the ESSER grants move out of the system. Some of those grants were in larger amounts, but they were ancillary ESSER dollars that came in small funding pots. So in total, that could be around $6.2 to $7.1 million exiting the system. We've talked already about our decline in enrollment, which we are predicting will be a continued trend, and that will be a factor in where this final reduction amount lands. And a huge unknown for us right now are legislative impacts. The governor's budget deals with a first parlance, I guess, at an inflationary price deflator, the IPD. Governor Inslee's budget has that at 4.5%, which would be directly related to salaries and benefits for our staff members. And that has implications to potentially widen the gap between what the state funds in salaries and what we pay out in salaries and benefits, because the IPD will transfer directly to staff that are in the prototypical school model, but we fund many staff outside of what the state funds in order to provide a solid education for our students. And we are left then to make up that difference with levy and grant dollars, which could be a big impact. The 4.5% in the governor's budget, again, is an opening suggestion, and it goes to the legislature, and they have a long time this year to argue about those kinds of things. The long legislative session runs until April 23rd. I think last year it closed March 10th.
Yes, March 10th, it was the close last year.
So we're up against a longer time frame for our legislators to make a decision on the IPD amount. And there's also some discussion of a potential rebase, which the staffing has a base salary set across the state, and this rebase could potentially up that base salary, which has implications for our budget as well. And it's possible both of those things could happen at the same time this year. We could get a rebase and an inflationary price deflator percentage that's significant. Another piece that's being talked about in the legislature is a decrease in regionalization dollars. Not all districts get regionalization dollars. East Wenatchee doesn't. We do. And we've seen a decrease in that of about 1% a year for the past several years. But they're talking about those dollars at the state level as well.
I will just add on in regards to the regionalization dollars, just a few years ago, we were getting an extra 6%. Currently, we're being funded at 3%. So already it's been cut in half. And another factor then in where we land in this range is the amount that we can save during the 22-23 fiscal year. So this year. And we did some things intentionally to create some initial savings that we're going to talk about on the next slide here. But we continue to look at ways to save this year that will help us moving into the future. So yeah, Liz, if you want to go to that next slide. This indicates some of the savings that we were able to put forward this year. So recognizing earlier this year that we had future budget challenges coming, we had a one-time opportunity to intentionally reallocate some resources and reduce costs to better leverage some of our available funding. And that resulted in an increased savings to our general fund, which you see here in the amount of a little more than $2.8 billion above what was projected from last June. And these 2.8 million in deliberate savings will be critical to offset lost revenue due to enrollment decline as part of our phased approach that will continue into the 23-24 and 24-25 school years. We are looking at the budget really as a managing a phased approach over 3 years, with this year being the first of those years. We're trying to reduce expenses as much as we can this year. And the fact that we have strong reserves allows us to manage reductions in a phased approach over this 3-year period, this year being the first year, as we continue to decrease our expenses. Phasing the reductions over the 3-year period also allows us to spread the impact over multiple years. It will allow us to get a better picture of several budget parameters, which are still unknown to us at this point. For example, future enrollment numbers, and also the legislative impacts on our funding that I discussed on the prior slide. So with that in mind, I am asking the board to consider allocation of this $2.8 million towards staffing and operational costs during the 2023-24 school year. And I would like to open discussion at this session about the potential to allocate the 2.8+ million that you see here that we accrued in savings. Ultimately, it will require a resolution to commit those funds for the purpose of addressing budget reductions in the 23-24 school year. And that would be similar to the manner in which we set aside funds for the softball facility. We would be committing them to an assigned area in the general fund for the purpose of addressing some of the impact of budget reductions in the 23-24 school year. And so I'd like to open up for general discussion about that ask. Of the budget committee here as well, so please.
Yeah, so I'll just open up with a comment. It seems like spreading the reductions over numerous years is the right thing to do for our people, you know, both our staff and our students. I feel like taking some of that worry factor away from staff is an important thing that we can do to ease folks' minds, and we can manage as much as we possibly can through natural attrition. So I personally am in favor of that suggestion.
And I'll add in my voice as well. And I want to repeat a little bit of what Superintendent Eagle touched on, that that if we do a phased approach, I just jotted down 3 words: it can be orderly, it can be efficient, and it can be thoughtful. And so that's dramatically better. Something else related to the survey of employees that I think is also to focus, it's a reduction for sure, but it's also a question of how can we do our job better? And I think that's an important question to ask. And I applaud the cabinet and the superintendent for going out to employees and seeking input from the grassroots so that it's bottom up as well as top down. All of those, I think, feed into the ability to have greater power, greater flexibility in doing this job. And I think that's important. The fact that we do come in with higher reserves, even apart from the 2.8 million, is an element of comfort that we can use. So yes, I strongly think that using the 2.8 million to strengthen the way the job needs to be done. And bear in mind, it's not just a single step. We're also dealing with that projected gradual decline in enrollment, which means that's an inevitable need to restructure, be adaptable. And I think involving all parties. Another point the superintendent made that I'll repeat is if we do it in a phased approach, apart from not doing anything in dramatic steps, we're able to look ahead a little bit better, have better information. So all in all, that 2.8 million, I think, is a great help to start this on sound footing.
Yeah, I'll just echo what they said. I think I support the phased approach. I think we've faced a lot of changes over the last few years. So adding some additional time, slowing down some of the more dramatic changes will help with a feeling of stability, both for our staff and for our students who may be impacted by these changes as well. Gives us a little more time to explore changes in other places that may not impact staff as drastically. So as much as it's tempting to say we've identified an area we can save and pull the trigger and save now, I think the best approach for our staff, our students, our district as a whole is to do a slower roll and allocate these resources now. So question for clarity. So these 2.8 million would be rolled into next year's to help with the budget cut, correct?
Correct. And what it would do is in a sense, allow us to continue reductions into the next year, the 24-25 school year, as part of this phased approach. It gives us an additional year to make use of things like natural attrition and spreads the impact over more than a single year.
Okay, so outside of natural attrition, have we considered any big impacts that we might have next year for the 24-25 budget? I'm just thinking, okay, well, right now it's 8 to 9 million. We're going to progress in the next couple of years. But have we considered all factors, like really gone outside the box so that we're not accounting for more of a loss? Is my question clear?
I think so.
Clear,
And
Todd?
unfortunately, I think the answer is that some of those things are still unknown for us. The IPD percentage is a big factor out there, whether or not the state decides to rebase, where we actually end up with enrollments. When we get the updated birth rate information, that will help us predict where we might be in our kindergarten classes. We know we can roll up some of the numbers that are already in the system. We know we have the impact of Pinnacle's prep opening and an additional grade level as they start 9th grade. But those factors that are in the purview of the legislature right now are still pretty big question marks that will continue on into our future. And this allows us to a little more time to consider what those impacts might look like moving forward.
I wanted to add one thing to my comment earlier, and one thing that was important to me is that we would not be using these dollars to supplement recurring expenses and that our fund balance would be preserved. I mean, we're doing this as a phased step. We are spending in areas that would recur, but it just gives us more time to make that reduction. But it also doesn't put us in jeopardy of lowering our fund balance to a level that is below the board policy.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm in full support of the rollout phase. One of the things it just popped into my mind, are we doing any advocacy with the legislature in regards to full funding for the IPD? It's a long session, but I know, for example, higher ed is up on the Hill this week. Do we send representatives on a local or a OSPI level, district level?
We have representatives for the WASDA group. One of you guys is a representative for the WASDA group. AWSP has groups and WEA has groups. I have not personally gone to that, but have written some letters in particular around things like special education funding.
Okay. Must just be the higher ed. But yes, I mean, because there's a big push on the higher education piece of it. So from the local level, from the district, not as in this district, but just the district and the state level. And so it would be good if we can organize to make it as a district, organize and make a push, whether it's lobbying or letters. So.
I had a lengthy discussion with one of our administrators recently who felt very strongly about this phased approach and was really, really intent on asking for it. And so I feel like there is support from staff in that respect to a longer phased situation. And I think you've put a lot of work and a lot of thought into it. And I think it makes the most sense and gives a little bit of peace to the staff that are most affected and probably will be most affected by this. So.
Any additional discussion on that ask from the board?
I just want to touch back on the ledge piece you were talking about. So the Legislative Assembly is coming up. We should have all received an invitation in our inboxes from WASDA and WASA. In the past, the board has gone as a whole to the legislative assemblies. And WASDA and WASA have a very prescriptive method of evaluating priorities. And we have a district has participated in identifying what the priorities are for our district. And those have been forwarded, I think, by you, Julie, correct?
We voted our priorities with WASDA, which this last November at their conference, which is what they will forward then at this session.
Right. Do you happen to recall whether the issue Maria asked about on IPD was in there? I don't remember.
I don't recall seeing anything that specific.
Okay.
That might have come out after,
right
after the priorities were set.
Yeah, they seem to carry the same themes year to year without much difference, and I don't recall that being on there.
It's just indicative of our need to play the long game on, ledge assemblies and our work with the state. Because it is hard when you get those lists to focus your mind on, wait a minute, what really is of utmost importance to us. And
And just a quick side note, because I was a little surprised. Senator Brad Hawkins is no longer on the K-12 committee. He's on the higher ed committee.
well, at legislative assembly, there is the opportunity to meet with other board members and superintendents around the state and to talk about the priorities. And so maybe at that event, there is the chance to put more of a focus there.
Thank you, board. So based on what I'm hearing in discussions this afternoon, I will draft a resolution that will become an action item I will try and get it on tomorrow's board meeting. Then you guys can take action on the 2.8 million at a regular meeting. We are continuing to put together materials. If you want to show the last slide here, and this is more for anybody that might be watching this at a later date here. We continue to put information about our budget on our website in prominent places. You can go to the home portion of the website and get to our budget area, or wenatcheeschools.org/budget will get you there. This QR code will also get you there. This is where presentations like this one, school board stuff where we've talked about budget, plus videos that Dr. Callahar and I have made about school budgeting, some documents about our budget, and our frequently asked questions document resides. So we'll continue to post information there for our staff and our public about where we're moving with the budget. And this concludes our workshop for this afternoon. Unless you guys have additional questions.
No, I just want to quickly say thank you to the budget committee, and cabinet, the unions for the commitment, while working on this very difficult issue of the commitment of working with the strategic planning goal, really setting the needs of our district while discussing this difficult topic.